Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Muhi Khwaja with American Muslim Community Foundation. And on today's Muslim Philanthropy podcast, I'm so honored to have our esteemed guest, Oussama Mezoui. Um, these days, he's with his own consulting firm, but he has a long storied past of engagement within the nonprofit sector, in Muslim philanthropy, and externally as well. Somebody who I regard as a personal friend, a dear mentor, and somebody with sharp expertise and acumen in nonprofit knowledge. So just a real pleasure to be with you, Osama.
Well, hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for hosting me. And that's a very generous introduction.
Absolutely. I mean, I can continue if you'd like.
No, I've learned from you as much as I hope you've learned from me. So thank you for hosting me.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Um, so just as we do, want to get a better sense and give a better sense to our listeners who Osama Mezoui is. So take us back to where it all began and kind of bring us up to speed with where you are.
Yeah, thanks, Muhi. It's interesting. I think the personal and the professional ended up being connected in ways that I think I just never envisioned. Born in Algeria, leaving Algeria at the age of 4 at the beginning of what became a very ugly civil war in the very early 90s, landing in London as an immigrant refugee child, as part of a large family. Um, and a working class family. And so kind of a typical story of immigration,
Yeah.
of, my parents figuring out their new life in a new country with a new language, and trying to navigate that life with 6 children. I think I know I was very blessed actually. I mean, the United Kingdom at that time, the early 90s, was a great place to land. We had a very strong social welfare net that provided us with education opportunities, with housing, with really a support system that very many migrants today don't have. There were legal routes for migration for refugees to enter the country. And I say all of that because, of course, my career ended up being in the nonprofit world where I'm serving missions and organizations that do very similar work, frontline service work, refugee assistance. And so I guess between arriving as a 4-year-old to London as a refugee to now being, running a consulting firm, in between, I think of it as a life of opportunities. I was blessed to be able to get an education, to go to university. My undergraduate was in London, University of Queen Mary in London, where
Hmm.
I studied history. That was something I was passionate about.
Love that.
Ended up then going to Oxford and then studying law, um, and graduating at quite a bad time, which was the global recession of 2008. And
I'm
I think like
familiar.
many of Yes, we're of a similar age. And like many
Yeah.
of us, I fell into nonprofit world. It wasn't something I really knew was an option. No one came to talk to us, either at Queen Mary or Oxford, about a career in the nonprofit world.
Mm.
Everybody was really thinking about, corporate world, corporate law. Initially with history, I thought I'd go into maybe journalism or something perhaps related to finance in the UK. Um, and met a person who became a mentor of mine, and really kind of saw something in me and introduced me to the nonprofit world. And so that's really how I got in. It was completely unplanned. I had no degrees at the time related to anything to do with nonprofit management, with fundraising, with, the third sector.
Yeah.
And was blessed to have a mentor, Mohib, who really threw me in the deep end, right? And everything I learned was through doing, through observing, uh, an individual who really believed in young talent. And therefore, that was the beginning of my journey in 2008, 9,
Love
in
that.
in the nonprofit world. And here we are.
Fascinating. I mean, my undergrad shifted from mechanical engineering to history. So,
Mhm.
I was in that automotive recession era of exactly when that hit. And I saw, I had an internship at an engineering company where I was let go. And I saw people with 20 years experience also being let go in that moment. So that was a wake up call for me. And luckily, mutual friend Farhan Latif was the director of alumni relations at the time at the University of Michigan Dearborn. And he said to me, "Hey, there's this internship. You should apply." And it was the development summer internship at the University of Michigan. So that's how I got into development as a career. But was always actively involved on campus, whether it was student body president or Amnesty International president or being a um, uh, working in the dean's office or even working as a tour guide and admissions counselor. So I think for me, like seeing this internship really showed me how the university as a whole fundraises and has a department for Office of University Development that has 500 staff members across marketing, centralized opportunities, accounting, database administration. So really was eye opening for me. And then, of course, my first gig was Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, where you're also a board member. But we were separated by probably 15 years there. But otherwise, I think there's a lot of intersections that you and I both have in this nonprofit space. So I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper into that.
Thanks, Muhi. What I'll add, Muhi, is that for me, development came much later. So for you, development was your first official gig.
Sure.
For me, my first title was executive officer, which ended
Okay.
up being basically a chief of staff role. But initially, I think, and I'm sharing this because a role like a personal assistant or an executive assistant can
Yeah.
actually be a fantastic way to get into the nonprofit world because I was able to, through the CEO and my relationship with him,
Yep.
really understand how nonprofits operate. Because when you're in every meeting, I was on
Mhm.
every trip with him. We were, sharing hotel rooms, traveling the world, and I was then able to see the fundraising function, the accounting function, the programs department, and have access to all the various verticals, if you like, of what it takes to run a nonprofit. So my first gig was as an executive assistant. Essentially, I had a fancy title, but I was helping the CEO who was leading the organization. And then I'll end on this, Muhi. It's funny. I think often there are experiences in life that guide us that we don't always recognize in the
Mhm.
moment. And it wasn't until a few years ago that it clicked that fundraising, although I never studied fundraising, I'd been around it forever, right? My
Yeah.
father, as an immigrant, was raising money while I was very young for the victims of the Algerian Civil War, right? And
Wow.
although he was doing it in his friends in a very kind of informal way, it's all the things that you and I now kind of teach and the things that
Right.
we tried to practice, right? Using your network mapping, engaging your community, hosting events, upgrading donors. And I just remember, I mean, it took me years for it to click that he was doing all of this while they were raising money for a cause that at the time had very little media attention. Um, and then, like you ended up, I ended up in student politics, student activism, um, charity events, etc. And so uh, it's all around us, even if we don't always recognize it. Fundraising and development and philanthropy uh, are there if we look closely.
Definitely. And, having lived in the San Francisco Bay Area and Silicon Valley, I definitely see the value of executive assistants. And there were EAs in the Bay Area that were making salaries far more, than just like a normal assistant would. And they would be considered part of the C-suite team because they were that integral to the operations of the organizations and companies that they were part of. So definitely see the value in, holding a Rolodex, maintaining the calendar, doing all of those important things that are essential to the function of a or institution. Um, take us to, kind of after you graduated, you had this mentor that kind of guided you to this path. And then I guess eventually you came to the US. Tell us kind of that career transition and kind of what you were looking for in that moment.
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. I think one is, I think especially if there's young people watching who are trying to figure out their careers or their career trajectory, especially today at a time when There are economic challenges where we're seeing the current US administration in particular shutting down US aid, AID, or other departments, foundations that are resizing or re-strategizing, organizations that have lost funding. Excuse me. So there's a period of uncertainty. It's a time of uncertainty. And also, I just wanted to say that I think number one is it's okay if you don't have it figured out. And so when I decided to say yes to my first few nonprofit jobs, I didn't anticipate where they would lead me. But I really believe in the power of yes and this idea of, at a young age, especially when you're in your young 20s, experiencing and exposing yourself to various opportunities within this sector. And, I want to start there. I didn't know that, having become an executive assistant, at one point I was a research officer for a human rights organization in London. I went and actually it's funny, I ended up taking a role as a campaign manager in a role that was funded by Oxfam UK,
Hmm.
Oxfam GB. Of course,
Wow.
now I sit on the board of Oxfam in the
Love that.
United States, right? And I
Yeah.
chair the advancement committee of Oxfam America. But all those years ago, I took a role as a campaigns manager, and my role was to activate, if you like, Muslim and minority youth in advocacy. How do we train and educate them and give them the tools and resources so that they become advocates on issues of inequality, of poverty, of climate change, etc. Again, an Oxfam GB funded project. So I fell into it. I wasn't really thinking of working in the nonprofit space. I met Saif Ahmed, who really changed my career trajectory. And I'll add a second point, the power of mentorship. So one is the power
Yeah.
of in your early 20s and mid 20s of trying different jobs, different organizations, different roles within the sector. And then two, having a mentor really changed my life and my trajectory. So Saif Ahmed was a phenomenal mentor who gave me immense opportunities to prove myself. And I could have, I could have, sunk. Thank God, alhamdulillah, I was able to swim. And I'm talking about, sending me to deployments overseas, doing research in sub-Saharan Africa, going and responding to disasters and leading small teams, going out seeking new funding opportunities in Central African Republic. Really, I mean, throwing me in the deep end and allowing me to kind of prove myself. And so mentorship is very important. Mentorship is valuable. For those who are seeking it, please seek it, find the right mentors. And then for those of us who are becoming very rapidly the uncles or the amus of our sector as we hit or our 40s or midlife, I think it's important that we don't forget, the power of mentorship.
Right.
So I spent my career mostly in faith-based organizations, Muhi. I found myself in a niche unintentionally, having started out in Muslim-led or Muslim-inspired organizations. The reality is that that's where I've spent most of my career, both in the UK and in the US. Um, so I left the UK with the title of basically acting head of programs, in the same organization where I was kind of chief of staff, I became the acting head of programs. And then an opportunity came knocking from the United States. What made that possible for me was that I'm married to an American citizen. And so we decided in 2014 to make the jump across the pond. And there I took on at that time my most senior role, which was VP of programs for an organization. Um, and that was my first exposure of the US in 2014 non-profit sector. Um, a lot of my focus was program implementation, program monitoring, program evaluation, setting up field offices, organizing emergency deployments. And so most of my career, apart from 2 or 3 years where I was with 1 year, I was with a human rights organization, 1.5 years or 2 years, I was with an advocacy organization. The rest of my career, Muhi, was in humanitarian international development. So that was the niche I was in. And then the sub niche, if you like, is faith-based humanitarian INGOs. And so for a number of years, I was on the road globally. I spent a lot of time overseas particularly sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, and in the Philippines, as well as the Caribbean uh, islands. And so fast forward a few years into my US journey, and an opportunity came, which was Penny Appeal. Many of you that are your listeners may be familiar with Penny Appeal USA specifically. There was an opportunity that came knocking, which was for me to become a co-founder and to launch the US arm, or if you like, the US um, subsidiary of Penny Appeal. And I shouldn't, subsidiary is the wrong word. It's a member office, if you like, of the global Penny Appeal family. And so that was an exciting opportunity to essentially take some seed funding and launch a new brand in a new market in a relatively competitive space. And that's really the first time I had to worry about fundraising at an institutional level. So I'd always been involved in fundraising as a student activist at high school and in college. In my career, however, I was the one spending money. I was the one getting grants, receiving grants from colleagues and monitoring them, implementing them, and reporting on them. And it wasn't until really Penny Appeal, Muhi, that I became chief fundraiser, right? As a CEO,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that stayed with me is regardless of the size of the organization, regardless of uh, the type of organization, I think if you take on a C-level role, you become a fundraiser, right?
So,
And
yeah, to that point, like for executive directors or chief executive officers, what percentage of your job would you say was fundraising?
look, for my case, in my case, Penny Peel was a new entity, and so we were trying with some small seed funding to become sustainable very quickly. And so fundraising had to be the number one priority. I held the title of CEO. In reality, I was the development director. And so at that time, early on, I would say 80% of my time was on fundraising. If you're a young startup organization, if you're an organization that doesn't have the resources to have a fully staffed development function, you're going to have to spend at least 50% of your time fundraising. Now, for larger organizations that have fully functioning processes, tools, personnel in the development function, then of course I later on it became more like 30% of my time, Muhi. And I think I would recommend, I think 30% was healthy for where we were, but it's hard to give a number because it's based on revenue, size of the organization,
Of
the
course.
age, right? And so it's hard to give a number. What I will say is that if you're an executive director or an aspiring executive director, it is your job to ensure with your board that there are resources for your strategy and there are resources for your mission. And fast forward, of course, I am a consultant now. I run a small consulting team, a Mezoui Consulting Group based out of Virginia. But I see it too often where non-profit CEOs, executive directors, Muhi, are actually not spending enough time on fundraising, right?
Right.
And yes, in an ideal world, you find that amazing, phenomenal chief development officer, and you no longer have to worry about fundraising. But that's not reality. And I think, the ED needs to work very closely with the board, making sure that the board are bringing in resources, making those new connections. The ED needs to understand uh, what the pipeline looks like when it comes to institutional funding, creating those new relationships, going out, being a champion for the brand, being a champion for the mission, and just making sure that major donors are getting face time with the executive director, being a major gift officer, basically, right? And
Yeah.
doing the work of a major gift officer. And so uh, the short answer is any executive director, regardless of the size of the organization, needs to spend some time of his or her week thinking about development, fundraising, relationships, and resources. Uh, so that's when I,
Wonderful.
for the first time, really started thinking about fundraising and Muhi at an institutional level.
Yeah. I think, it's really important. A few things that you touched base on was looking into what was helpful for you was your early experience and also the help of mentors. Of course, I've been blessed with several mentors myself within the Muslim community, outside of it, in the nonprofit world. Um, from various aspects, but I think helping create a pipeline for opportunities in Muslim led nonprofits is something that will only benefit our sector. And I think that that's a real great thing to maybe establish an internship type of program where college students or recent graduates can be placed with institutions that have opportunities not only in development but in finance or operations or programs and across the spectrum to really build well qualified um, future nonprofit leaders. And there's obviously efforts with the Center on Muslim Philanthropy to educate best practices and standards within the nonprofit Muslim focused community. But I think the more that we can do in this area is critical.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, everyone's familiar with the work of Dr. Sharik Siddiqui, for example, at the
Yeah.
Lily School in terms of teaching best practices. In the UK, there is the Islamic Relief-led Academy in Birmingham, which was launched many, many years ago. There's the Zakat Institute, a relatively recent institute, I think, that launched in Illinois not too long ago. So there are these initiatives. I think, Mohi, you're absolutely right. I think what's vital is that we start at the kind of high school slash university level
Yeah.
in actually letting young people know that there is a viable career, a fulfilling career open to you in the third sector. I think, especially for those of us from migrant families, from immigrant communities, the cliche is true, right? It's engineering, it's law, it's medicine. How many of us were even exposed to this idea of a fulfilling career in meaningful work? And so, whether you're an accountant, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a project manager, PMO, whether you are an analyst, a data analyst, a tech guru, you can apply these skills in a nonprofit setting. It doesn't have to be corporate America or, you know, Silicon Valley. And so I think we have to start there. I think you're absolutely right. One of
Yeah.
the things that keeps me up here is I think we are at a stage of leadership transfer, a generational, I would say,
Yeah.
once in a generation opportunity. There are so many institutions, faith-led organizations, charities across the United States, the UK, North America, Canada, Australia, that will very soon need new leaders as founders start to retire, to move on. We're already
Mhm.
seeing that. And it really does worry me. I think this underinvestment in leadership for the last few decades may come back to bite us, and I worry about that as a real challenge for Muslim organizations. And we're seeing the same with mainstream. Just to be clear, I think there is a shift
Yeah.
in leadership also happening in mainstream. But I think our focus of this conversation is really Muslim faith-led, faith-inspired organizations. And so one thing that keeps me up actually is, I think, a this talent question of how
Right.
do we build a pipeline of new talent, and how do we develop current talent, those who are in middle management today, those who are already working within non-profit institutions. How do you accelerate their learning, their growth? How do you expose them to experiences so that they're actually able to do justice to the role of executive director or any C-suite role? Um, and so, yes, mentorship, yes, opportunities at university, internships, paid internships, to be clear,
Yeah.
right? Um, and that's a start.
For sure. I think through my development summer internship program, that was $15 an hour as a college student, right? So that was awesome money back then. And then, you know, even my time at American Red Cross for 5 years, really seeing how a large infrastructure operates, the ins and outs, was able to learn from that experience. And it was probably the most formative experience as a major gift officer for my career. And then being able to bring that back to the Muslim community. So I think it's just as important to serve in positions that may not be directly related to the Muslim community, but you can learn from and bring that experience back.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
I would actually agree with that 100%. I think if you're able to see and expose yourself to far larger, complex institutions, then absolutely go for it. One thing that you reminded me of is you spoke about the $15 an hour, Muhi. I'll just share this story. I think, of course, we need paid internships. I think absolutely, you know me well. I believe in paying fair salaries, competitive salaries.
Yes.
We want the best talent that we can afford so that when we are competing with corporate America, that we can attract bright, intelligent minds, curious minds to our sector. However, my appeal to those who are maybe listening and thinking about a career in the nonprofit world is, also the importance of sacrifice in those early years, right?
Yeah.
That work, of course you need to pay your bills, but if you're in your 20s and you can afford to work for a lesser salary, as long as the opportunity is correct, right, as long as you're learning, as long as you're growing, as long as you're being exposed and given opportunities, I would highly recommend young people to not focus on only the pay package. And the reason I say that, I was having a conversation a couple of days ago with a lady that I mentor, and she was hiring her first hire at this small foundation where she works. And the person who she wanted to offer the job to, a very bright young university graduate, first job, was asking for over $95,000, right? First job out of college, right?
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's inflation, of course, there's geographic weighting that's important. But uh, my first job here was £14,000 and as a graduate, right? So
Wow.
what's that? 20,000 US dollars. And I'm not talking about the 60s or 70s, right? I'm talking about the 2000s here. And so it was
Yeah.
painful. I mean, it wasn't easy to survive in London after tax on a
Sure.
salary of, I think I was taking home £830 a month was my take home,
Wow.
right? But I have no regrets. I mean, I learned so much during that 1 year. And then I moved on to a slight raise in another job. And it wasn't really until, my late 20s that I started earning what you may call a respectable salary. So
Yeah.
just on this point, I think it's important that we tackle it. I think people underestimate how much money they can make in our sector. If you're
Yeah.
competent, if you do well, if you're smart, if you're intelligent and you work hard, you will end up with a six-figure salary. Like
Easily.
you can easily lead a very comfortable life and support
Yeah.
a family and support your aspirations in a non-profit sector.
Yeah.
However, the beginning of your career may require some sacrifices, and you can't compare entry-level salaries in our sector to those of a McKinsey or, of course, or a Bain or a
Right.
corporate America. And so, just think it's important that people realize that there is after a few years, real opportunity to have a successful career, including a good salary. But at the beginning of your career, there are some sacrifices that I think we all made and that I'd highly recommend and encourage young people to think about.
Yeah. And I think some of the additional sacrifices may be your benefits package, healthcare, 401k. I know through experience and from others that those are things that they had sacrificed even until now. And it's not until a more senior role or a more established nonprofit that they were able to get some of those things. So definitely real challenges and definitely where you can sacrifice. I think that's some great advice as well. I think this is a good opportunity to kind of focus on your work in your consulting, and you have a blog and you've written some brilliant posts on things that people should consider when they maybe want to shift acting like a donor to becoming a philanthropist, or how mechanics and operations of institutions should be from a program perspective and fundraising perspective and costs associated with all of that. So I want to give you an opportunity to shed some light on your expertise here.
Yeah, thanks, Muhi. Just before you do, I mean, just to finish the thought, actually, we're
Yeah,
talking about getting into the sector. And as I said earlier, I never studied anything to do with nonprofit leadership, nonprofit management. And so I get a lot of questions from young individuals or mid-career folks who talk about kind of transitioning either into our space, into the third sector, the nonprofit world, or transitioning from, if you like, one department to the next, moving, in terms of from programs to fundraising or vice versa, etc. And I think it's lifelong learning. It sounds cliche, but I think it's so important that those our colleagues who are young in their career or mid-career that continue to find opportunities for growth in more kind of academic settings as well. And there are so many opportunities out there that I took advantage of once I landed in the US. You know, I took the course at Georgetown University,
Yeah.
the non-profit
Yep.
management course. It was amazing for me. So I took it, I think 15 years into my career, but actually it kind of helped cement and solidify so much of what I knew, and it helped me make certain connections around non-profit management that perhaps I hadn't previously thought of. And so it was an intense kind of course. At the time, it was about $5,500 investment. So for me, it was a significant investment of
Yeah.
resources, but it was in person. It involved a lot of weekends in person with a fantastic cohort of colleagues working for all sorts of missions, right? And it covered fundraising and accounting and marketing and branding and impact and program management. And so I just highly encourage folks who are thinking of coming into the sector or moving, horizontally within the sector, that there are lots of opportunities. I also ended up taking some courses at the Harvard Kennedy School, who
Hmm.
offer a plethora of courses on a range of nonprofit management topics. I ended up becoming a CFRE, a certified
Absolutely.
fundraising executive. So
Yep.
I bought the books, studied the books, took the exam, became a CFRE. Um, and so I just wanted to, yes, I didn't come from I don't have an undergraduate degree or a graduate degree in anything related to nonprofit management, but that shouldn't stop you. That there are fantastic courses. If you're in the UK, Canada, anywhere, the US, there are fantastic opportunities for you to get certified, very practical vocational courses that I highly recommend. And I had a great experience with the Georgetown one, and I highly recommend folks to look into that one. But again, Harvard School and other schools offer some fantastic courses. So anyway,
Yeah.
to kind of answer your question, um,
Well,
look, I
I'll co-sign on that, and I want to mention that you actually set up a scholarship through Penny Appeal for that Georgetown program, and that's how I found out about it and ended up taking the course. Although I wasn't selected as a scholarship recipient, like somebody else benefited, and I think that's the main point is that there are now opportunities for Muslim practitioners to be in spaces outside of our community and gain knowledge from all of these practitioners in the field as well. So, professional development, highly recommend all of these opportunities. Also, a CFRE, and I think there's great value in that as a fundraiser, and people who are consultants, it greatly benefits them. So, yeah.
And the last thing on this, Mohit, if you're a leader of an organization listening to this or watching this, I think it's so important that you allow your staff the resources, both the time
Yep.
and the money that they need to go away and upskill themselves, right? You will benefit, your institution, your organization will benefit by spending that $5,000, $3,000, whatever it may be, excuse me, in giving them some time, to do their homework and do their assignments and attend classes. You will see the benefits of that and reap the rewards as an organization, but also as a sector. And so, if you are in a position of leadership, if you're a director of development, if you're a fundraising manager, if you're a CEO or ED, think through the last time you actually offered these opportunities to your employees, to your team members,
Yeah.
and just a really kind of important investment in the long-term success of your missions.
What I'll say
So
as well is, even though ISPU, my salary, I'll say it, $30,000 right out of college, they did provide professional development. And I took the courses every year through Indiana University and the fundraising school to get my CFRM certificate. And that was also formative. So, a lot of opportunities, even though it was low pay, there was great opportunity for learning, surrounding myself with peers who knew more than myself, and just able to be a sponge and learn all of that. So, yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, so then to answer your question, I was at Penny Pill for nearly 6 years, up until December of 2021. And people always ask me, why did you leave? And I think we're so used to, unfortunately, maybe personnel issues or drama, that I think a lot of people were surprised to hear that, I actually left on excellent terms and very good on my own terms. much to the disappointment of the board, actually, and of my colleagues. And there were many reasons, for my decision. One of them, Muhi, was one that I'd mentioned in my first ever staff meeting. The first few people that I'd hired, and I remember sitting them in a room, and I said to them, "If I'm here in 7 years, take me outside and shoot me." Right?
Mm,
And the point I was trying to say was that this is about institution building, right?
yeah,
As we set out on a path, that we are crippled or as a community with founder-led institutions, where founder syndrome is
right.
prohibiting the potential impact that these institutions can make. And so there were many reasons. We were finally blessed to have a child after many years, and so I wanted to spend more time with my new daughter, and also 6 years of a founder working 80-hour weeks, working through COVID.
Yeah,
There were many reasons that I decided in December of 21 to step down from Penny Pill USA. But one of the drivers, and I mentioned this again in my first ever meeting, was to prove to individuals and to founders and to CEOs that there is a life after leadership, right?
yeah, of
That you will land, that you will find yourself, and that institutions may go through challenging times after you leave, right? And we've seen that in
course.
various organizations. Um, but if you set the right foundations, strong foundations, they eventually do find themselves, they find their feet. And organizations go through life cycles, just like us as human beings. We have good periods and bad periods, productive periods and not so productive periods. And
Yeah.
institutions are the same. And so I left Penny Pill in December of 21, feeling at the time that I left very strong foundations. I felt, there was good cash reserves, healthy revenue, really good, strong donor base, etc. A diverse board, 15 full-time employees. So it felt like the right time for me to go. Um, Now the plan, Muhi, was, and there's a theme here. Nothing is planned, right? Uh, the plan was to go and maybe consult for a very short time. Enjoy my daughter, help, be at home, be available, um, and then jump back into work if the right gig came along. That was the plan, maybe 6 months maximum to be a consultant. I'm 4 years now into this journey. And so again, it wasn't really planned. What became apparent very quickly was that there was a massive need and a demand for uh, for help, for assistance, for expertise. And Alhamdulillah, thank God, here we are 4 years into this journey. We are a bench, a team of consultants helping organizations on strategy, on governance, on compliance, leadership, capacity building, and our most recent, I'm very excited by this offering, is really data strategies, data analysis, data infrastructure, and making sure that organizations are getting ready for the world, the AI world that's arrived, right? And that we are ill prepared for. And so we started, I started consulting 4 years ago, and alhamdulillah, it's going well. It's an interesting place to be because now all of a sudden you have an outsider perspective of these institutions, right? Going from being an employee for many, many years, and being a leader, being responsible for the board, being responsible for fundraising and budgets and reporting and all of that, to all of a sudden being an advisor, right? And that's a very different reality, both in terms of your lived experience of a consultant, not having colleagues, not having, a large team, not seeing your
Yeah,
colleagues every day, diving into missions and then leaving, caring about certain organizations, really diving deep into cultures and philosophies and missions and colleagues, and then having to say goodbye to them. So it's a very different lived experience. For those thinking about consulting, it's very rewarding. At times can be challenging. At times can be lonely, and very happy doing it because what I've been able to do, Muhi, is actually then expose myself to very different sectors. Right, I spent my career in the humanitarian INGO space and predominantly Muslim space. What I've been able to do these last 4 years is actually get invited into education non-profit, disability non-profit, advocacy groups. and I'm doing more work with organizations outside of our faith, so Christian-led organizations, and secular organizations fighting a good fight. And so from a personal reflection, it's been very, very rewarding, despite the challenges that I've outlined of not having colleagues, of sometimes loneliness as a consultant, of not
Sure.
always getting your way as a consultant. All you can do is advise and recommend and suggest, right? With
Yeah.
very sometimes little control over follow-up and execution. Um, on the issue of where we are, I think we are at a critical sector in terms of the Muslim-led, faith-based organizations and charities, non-profits. I would say across North America and Western Europe. And these organizations, I think, are a very important inflection point, right? We go back to the last 30 years where they were founded 20 years, 15 years ago on really good intention, as we say, Nia. The intention was there, a desire to make an impact, a desire to do good, often by people who had no exposure or experience of managing community organizations, of managing
Right.
nonprofits, managing large budgets, managing boards, managing staff, often doctors, engineers, and hardworking members of our community, our forefathers who built these institutions. Um, and now I think there are some really important conversations that are happening and on the issue of effectiveness, how effective are
Yeah.
our organizations, how efficient are our organizations. Do we have the right governance in place to make sure that these institutions outlive their founders and that they continue to stay relevant in today's climate? There's pressure now, as you know, Muhi, coming from both external pressure from the U.S. administration, from European governments, asking tough questions. Islamophobia is a factor. It's a reality
Of
that we've
course.
dealt with for decades, right? An unfair scrutiny of Muslim organizations since 9/11, and I would argue even before 9/11. So there are these external pressures that if our institutions ignore, are really existential, and are challenging the very existence of these institutions. And then we have the internal pressure that you referred to in terms of donors are asking more questions. They're asking more sophisticated questions. We have, as we saw this Ramadan, folks writing exposés, taking 990s and dismantling them, breaking them down, trying to understand them. Now they don't always land in the right place. Their analysis isn't always correct. But the point I'm making is that we're seeing now internal pressure from our communities asking about the money, quite rightly, that they're donating and how effective are you being and efficient are you being with the money that I'm giving you. Um, and so there's these two pressures, external, internal. And I think our leaders, our boards, our executive directors really need to meet the moment. And I'm not sure right now that that's happening, right? Um, and so governance, governance, governance. One thing we haven't mentioned here is the role of board members and the
Yeah.
importance of good governance, right? And so, yes, you can enter this sector as an employee, as a development professional, but there are many other ways that you can actually make a massive and important contribution to Muslim and mainstream nonprofits, which is through the board. And my learnings have been invaluable in terms of me having the opportunity to sit on boards these last 10 plus years have it's been invaluable because you get to see, of course, the nonprofit management from a very different perspective, and you get exposed to colleagues, professionals from different sectors, all contributing to the mission. And so if you're looking to get involved, one way to get involved is really through board becoming board directors, becoming trustees. That might be your local masjid, your mosque. That might be a local soup kitchen. It might be a refugee assistance program. Whatever mission, whatever cause you're passionate about, look at which institutions, which organizations are serving that mission, serving that cause, and look at joining boards, and you'll learn a heck of a lot. You'll meet fantastic people, um, And I think that's where real change, Muhi, can start. We can talk about development and the challenges of development. I think we can talk about leadership and the we already spoke about talent and the talent gap that we're seeing and the need for a rapid and large investment in talent. But actually, I think the number one priority, I'm not sure if you agree with me, Muhi, is actually governance. We have to fix governance. And if our
It's critical.
organizations have
Yeah.
stronger boards, if we can attract the best talent on our boards, if we can institutionalize so many of our initiatives and organizations from being individual led, founder led, to being healthy, robust, independent, well governed institutions, then we're going to succeed. Then we can fix fundraising and we can fix programmatic inefficiencies and we can fix issues with accounting and 990 filings.
Right.
But the number one priority from my perspective and my appeal to anyone listening is governance, governance, governance.
My appeal, and this may be bold of me to ask on a recorded podcast, is once you term off of ISPU or Oxfam, consider AMCF. We'd love to have you as a board member.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. You never say never. I won't make a commitment on a live
Yeah.
recorded podcast, but you never say never.
Awesome. I think you highlighted something very important around founder syndrome. I think there's, institutional drain or gain, as well intended as people are. And I think it was very forward of you in your founding meeting to say 7 years, right? And I think that that's a good timeline for people to have impact, create systems, build infrastructure. As a organization, American Muslim Community Foundation, we've had our ebbs and flows of growth. I've been everything from a volunteer to a consultant to a full-time employee, a part-time employee, and cyclical as well through the waves of the institution. But I'm really proud that we hired a full-time executive director. Shazeen Mufti has been part of nonprofits for a majority of her career. She's been a consultant with AMCF. She understands the mission and vision. She's been a member of our American Muslim Women's Giving Circle. So she's seen the programs and services and impact and is really helping us tell that story much more effectively in ways that I, as the founder, couldn't. I had this idea. I was able to get it up as a startup and running and build connections. And alhamdulillah, I can lean on my network to build this trust. And alhamdulillah, we've given out $30 million. We have over $8 million of assets under management. We manage around 30 endowments, about 270 or 280 donor advised funds. So we have tangible results. But what Shazeen is able to do is speak beyond the metrics, speak beyond the impact, look at things from a program perspective and provide value. And, my lane is always going to be in like new business development and fundraising. But her as an executive director brings in that strength of operations, of financial acumen, of so many other things where I didn't have that skill set. And I think it's a real nice yin and yang balance where we're able to lean on each other. We just had a board meeting and, producing the board packet, speaking of our accomplishments in a different light, holding the strategic planning retreat. Those are things that, I love doing and being part of, but I don't think that I have to be the one to do everything at the organization. So I'm with you on that fact. And I think one of the brilliant things of Penny Appeal's new CEO, Dilara Saeed, she was able to leave the Muslim Civic Coalition, an organization that she founded, right? And come into the role at Penny Appeal. And to be honest, that's got my brain thinking of like, oh my God, if she did it, maybe I can do it too. Right. So I think that there's a lot of ways in which we can uplift each other and encourage each other to not be a drain on our institutions, but to be a value add. And that necessarily doesn't have to be from the seat of a leadership role. It can be
Yeah.
as a board member transitioning to do that. It can be in multiple different ways. So I think that as we do have a definitive founder syndrome mentality or this is the way it's always been done mentality, we have to strongly reconsider of what's best for the community, what's best for the institution, what's best for ourselves. And I would argue that even through your consulting in the last 4 years, you've probably grown in significant ways that had you stayed at Penny Appeal, you maybe not have. Right. So I think that just as we had this entrepreneurial spirit of starting these institutions, and as blessed as the sector is, and how many new institutions are sprouting up, I think we have to take a real hard look of saying, what are the current institutions doing? What can be done for collaboration? Yes, there can be new organizations, but again, why reinvent the wheel, right? It takes so much um, resources, institutional knowledge um, to kind of reproduce the wheel. But yeah, there's a lot that I can continue to diatribe on. But
No, I think I just want to one thing that as you speak that comes to my mind is, of course, it's hard to generalize. It depends on what subsector we're talking about. But if I raise the one that I'm the most familiar with, which is the humanitarian sector, we are, of course, seeing this mushrooming, this
yeah,
plethora of organizations that have come up, new brands in the last few years, at a time when actually the mainstream is consolidating, right? What we're seeing is mergers happening
yeah,
in mainstream organizations understanding the challenges that are ahead of us in terms of limited resources, the fundraising changes, digital marketing's ever decreasing return, and the decrease in government funding, not just in the United States, but we're seeing that across all of Western Europe,
yeah,
et cetera, et cetera. And so the landscape is changing. And so I think this is a period not of launching new brands and new institutions. If anyone is thinking of that, I think it's actually a period of stability, of stabilizing, of cementing what we've built as a community these last few decades. And my appeal of many that I've made today is if you're an institution and you've got other organizations doing very similar work to you, have you thought about mergers, right? Have you had a conversation with your board to say, hey, this isn't about my name or our brand or our history or ego, which is the biggest thing that prevents mergers from happening. But if this is really about impact on the
right,
world, what who should we be looking at to potentially merge and maximize our impact, right? And I'm not going to be calling out names or institutions, but if there's three or four institutions all working in a certain part of the world, they should be talking about increasing their impact through an economy of scaling, right?
yeah,
Through merging. If you work in the same thematic area, so not necessarily geographic, but if you specialize in the same thematic area, who are the other brands, missions doing very similar work to you? Because we are seeing inefficiencies, right? Overhead, back office operations, not a problem. All these things cost money, and I'm a big advocate of that. But is it necessary? And what we're seeing is people in mainstream institutions having real conversations about mergers and about bringing talent and money and resources together to have a bigger impact at a time of uncertainty, right? I'm talking to you tonight from Doha, from Qatar. We're in the middle of this senseless, illegal, war on Lebanon and Iran and the ramifications that it's had for the whole region. And it's hard to predict what's going to happen globally next week, let alone 3 years time or 5 years time. And so
yeah,
during a period of technological change, economic uncertainty, political instability, as the Western world moves to the far right in terms of democratic choices that are being made, this is not business as usual, right? And if leaders in our community are are leading the same way they led 5 years ago, 3 years ago, that's really not sufficient, right? We've got to take into consideration where the world is today and where the world is moving these next few months and years, and prepare our missions and our institutions for that. And so that's an appeal to maybe founders and to leaders leaders and to board members. And one thing you mentioned some of the articles. I have, Muhi, in recent months, very recent months, decided to have a more public face. You may have noticed that.
Yeah.
I've traditionally had a very private social media presence.
Hmm.
And what I made a conscious decision a couple of months ago that because I think we are at this inflection point, that it was important for me to add my humble voice, one voice of many, to the debate publicly. And so you would have noticed I've kind of changed my Instagram, for example. We're very much focused on me giving my opinions and my advice to both institutions and to donors, because I think we
Yeah.
need that dual approach, right? So
Hmm.
as a consultant, I spend my time working with boards, with chairs, with executive directors. But what I want to do now with my free time and my spare time is really talk to our community, to our donors, to our philanthropists, right? And so, yes, you know, you mentioned a couple of articles I wrote this Ramadan. I've been doing, and although it's not a comfortable place for me, social media videos, and
So valuable. So valuable. Yeah.
learning how to kind of do a better job of my social media presence, because I think we need the pressure from our community. We need donors to ask better questions. We need philanthropists, not donors, as I wrote recently or spoke about recently. And so that's, I think, part of this conversation and the work of the American Muslim Community Foundation. I mean, you were the first that I can think of that started talking about donor advice funds in our community, right? How you're dealing with more sophisticated donors who are strategically thinking about their wealth, their estates, estate planning, ways to give, tax implications. And you were the first really that I can think of that started having those conversations in the United States. And so you'll understand this, but I think we can't just focus on nonprofit leadership and talent and governance. I think we also have a lot of work to do with our community to explain how nonprofits work, to
Right.
explain the importance of investment in overhead, but
Yep.
also to make them more sophisticated philanthropists, because that pressure will, I'm confident, make for stronger, more resilient, more robust institutions in our community.
Absolutely. Um, I want to give you an opportunity to share if there's anything that we didn't cover. I know we said a lot today, but if there's anything else that you wanted to really share, any thing to somebody who may be listening, advice, what would that be?
First and foremost, Mohi, once again, thanks so much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to spend this time with you. It's been too long. We need to get a good cup of coffee soon.
Definitely.
Um, Look, I think again we are at this inflection point. We, meaning the American Muslim, and I would make that even wider. Western Muslim institutions
Mhm.
are at this inflection point, and I think we have to take it seriously. For we have to fix our governance. So if you're involved in leadership, if you're a board member, if you're a leader, we have to fix our governance, the governance of our institutions. We have to invest in leadership, in talent. We have to make sure that we're building institutions that outlive us, outlive our children, and plan for the next 50 years. Number one. I think number two, if you're an individual, I highly encourage you to work in this sector, to volunteer in this space. We need you. We need your expertise. We need your talent. Our institutions get a bad rep, Muhim, and I want to end by saying they do important work, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I could list 100 institutions. You know, I think of the imanas and the imans and the ummah clinics and the muhsins and the ISPUs, and I mean, I don't want to leave anybody out. I mean, ISF, and you know, there's so
Critical
many institutions,
organization.
right? Critical organizations doing important work, right? And so overworked, under-resourced, right? Young institutions that don't have decades of experience and institutional knowledge, right? Often volunteer-led, volunteer-founded. So we get a hard time, we meaning the Muslim American and generally Muslim-led institutions, but we pack a punch, right? We do
Yeah.
fantastic work, important work with limited resources. I want to acknowledge that, yes, we have work to do, which we've already spoken about. And for donors and philanthropists, my appeal is not to give up on these institutions. These are community institutions. Get involved, ask the tough questions, volunteer, get on the board, right? And help fix them, right? Help fix them. I can tell you, Muhi, and I'll end all this. I've spent 2 decades now in this space. I have yet to see really any most of the challenges are born out of a lack of resources, a lack of expertise, a lack of knowledge. It's really not corruption in the traditional sense, right? It's not
Sure.
malice. It's not,
Maybe
it's
negligence at its worst.
right?
Yeah.
And so I'm optimistic. I think we can continue to build these institutions, build their strong foundations, secure them for our children and for our grandchildren. But that means that we need the community to support them in giving, in asking the tough questions, in volunteering. And I think together, leaders, community members, donors, board directors, consultants, we can inshallah continue this young, young journey, right, of American Muslim and Western Muslim institutions.
Definitely. So eloquently said, Osama. For those of you who are listening, if your organizations have budgets to hire a consultant from strategic planning to operations to development to the data analytics, consider Mezoui Consulting. Um, I know that I personally have benefited just from, again, listening this last hour and taking these gems with me. And definitely would love to make you another cup of coffee and enjoy it very soon. So thank you so much for your time, Osama.
Thank you, Muhi. Assalamu alaikum. Take
Wa
care.
alaikum assalam.